back to Block TV. Today, we are joined by Bitcoin influencer and thought leader, Dan Held. Dan, thanks for joining us in these crazy times.
Times in my lifetime.
Yeah, for sure. Well, mine too, my short lifetime. But start off, Bitcoin. Do you still consider it kind of a safe haven asset? Markets are going all over the place. Bitcoin did recover a little bit today, but overall, still wild fluctuations. What's your take on Bitcoin?
Well, Bitcoin is an uncorrelated asset, and it's eventually maturing into a unanimous safe haven asset. Right now, that safe haven asset narrative, and Bitcoin being a safe haven, is only really understood and respected by a few million people, not tens or hundreds or billions of people, which gold has that Lindy effect, or that kind of historical luxury of being the unanimous store of value. So, what's interesting is that when we look at prices, a lot of people look at Bitcoin's fluctuation and Bitcoin dropping during a period of risk off sentiment as a point against Bitcoin being a safe haven. But I think they really misunderstand what safe haven means. So if we look at gold, the unanimous safe haven or store of value asset, gold on the onset of the 2008 financial crisis dropped 30% in value. And similarly, over the last few weeks, gold bottomed out at minus 15% from its highs, in terms of recent highs. And so store of value does not mean price stability. If an asset is a store of value, it is antithetical to price stability, because if the price was maintained stable, that means that there would be a centralized entity capable of influencing it enough to maintain that purchasing power. So inherently, a gold or digital gold like Bitcoin, they're going to fluctuate in terms of purchasing power, because there's no centralized entity like the Fed to keep that purchasing power stabilized. So that's kind of one of the biggest misnomers out there, is that Bitcoin, because it wasn't stable, because it dropped in price when everything else dropped in price, that means that it's not a safe haven. That's not at all what a safe haven means. So what we saw in the 2008 financial crisis, and what we're starting to see now, is that the safe havens over time eventually decouple from the large amounts of drops, price drops across the board, across different asset types. In the beginning, everyone is selling everything they have, including gold and Bitcoin, to meet margin calls, to meet other liquidity requirements that they have. And so people basically panic sell everything. And so we saw that in 2008, we saw that now, and we're starting to see the market, recover a little bit here, and for gold and Bitcoin to decouple from the S&P. And so Bitcoin still has its properties as a safe haven asset. The same with gold. They're not centrally controlled. There's a high, requirement to create new units of the currency, proof of work in essence, in both. You've got the Lindy effect, where the number of believers that believe in it are still there. You've got, a low inflation rate. And Bitcoin's monetary policy is transparent and understood by all. So you've got all these properties where it still has the store value property there. Nothing changed because the price changed. Now, certainly there is something to be said if Bitcoin falls below a certain value. For instance, if Bitcoin went to $10, I think we could unanimously say that Bitcoin has failed. Bitcoin would never die, but it could enter a period of purgatory, where it's like a lot of these altcoins that fluctuate between zero and something little. Mm-hmm. So Bitcoin's price is a representation of its Lindy effect. As Bitcoin goes up and up in value from $10 to $100 to $1,000 to $10,000, it can't keep retracing down to $1,000, because that would mean that the aggregate shared belief in Bitcoin will have evaporated so much that no one wants to be a bid in between the current price and $1,000. So certainly Bitcoin going below a very low price would indicate that the Lindy effect has evaporated, and that Bitcoin's shared consciousness has also evaporated. But we didn't see that. We saw Bitcoin defend 3,900 and bounce back very, very quickly. So I viewed that as incredibly bullish. I mean, we're looking at one of the most volatile moments in the stock market history of all recorded history. And so for Bitcoin, which has no backstop, it has no bailout, has no Federal Reserve or centralized entity for the aggregate hodlers across the world to go in there and put in a bid and maintain a price floor, was very indicative of Bitcoin's resiliency.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting. Is this really the first, major test on a grand scale of decentralized currencies versus centralized currencies. The Fed is printing and printing money. Governments around the world are printing money to kind of buoy the market. The Fed announced that they're going to buy unlimited. There's going to be unlimited QE. They're going to be buying unlimited bonds and other capital. I mean, is this truly what we're going to see unfold? Going forward, will we see? Is this the kind of the centralized markets and the centralized currencies going head to head with the decentralized markets?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, this is Bitcoin's first moment to shine during a very risk off event or a recession type event. Bitcoin has largely been born and grew in one of the largest bull markets in human history. So this is a big test for Bitcoin. It's a test of the resiliency of the hodlers. They're looking across their other assets like equities, bonds, and they're worried about paying their mortgage. But despite that, the aggregate shared belief of hodlers across the world created that price floor. The belief in it, the belief to put in a bid to buy when everyone else is selling, that creates a floor and a faith and a belief in the coin. The dollar, gold, everything else requires the same sort of shared belief in it to give it value. There are core underlying principles as to why it has value in terms of how it's been structured as a good store of value. But other than that, it requires humans to breathe their belief into it for it to really become a money. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, we're talking about it. I believe that since records were kept since 1947, these are some of the most volatile moments in the market. So for Bitcoin, a very volatile asset by itself, to withstand such intense turbulence, I think is really, really amazing to see. I couldn't have expected Bitcoin to perform better. Bitcoin is very volatile. We had that 45% drop in one day, but we've since recovered. And now we're almost at $7,000 a Bitcoin. So I think Bitcoin has performed phenomenally given the macro concerns.
Mm-hmm. Especially those macro concerns, the effects that coronavirus has brought down on a lot of industries, such as the airline industry, travel, and even service industries across the board are really being battered by this idea of quarantine and isolation, where people simply can't go out, they can't spend in person. How will coronavirus, if it will, how will it affect miners, cryptocurrency miners, Bitcoin miners, and other exchange and crypto exchange operations? Will it have an effect, and how so?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when we look at the exchange infrastructure like Kraken, so I work at Kraken, and Kraken's a remote first culture. So Kraken is uniquely positioned to do well in this market. By default, you are a remote employee. There are offices in several cities, but by default, you're a remote employee. So we have structured all of our processes around working remote. So we're ready to go. Kraken has also set up a series of different security parameters to make sure that everything runs smoothly during this time. So Kraken, I think, is a good testament to how to build resilient 21st century companies that work in the crypto space. Companies like Coinbase issued I believe they issued an early action plan as to how they would deal with the coronavirus. I think they sent that out in January. And then on the exchange side, it looks like everything's operating very smoothly there. A lot of this is more, you can do this from home. There are maybe a few engineers who have to go touch physical servers at some point. I'm sure there's a few of those individuals, but overall, there's very few in-person sort of interactions needed for Bitcoin and Bitcoin markets to continue to function. When it comes to Bitcoin full nodes and Bitcoin miners, those operations require very few people, and when those people do interact, it's pretty far away. I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of a Bitcoin mining facility, but they're very spread out, and it's mainly just a bunch of servers in a room and maybe one individual going in there and tweaking different parameters or making sure some things are working properly. So the Bitcoin network itself, the Bitcoin market infrastructure, those all seem to be really robust. Even if the coronavirus continue to progress, I think those companies are in really good positions.
Mm-hmm. That it is interesting. You mentioned Bitcoin mining facilities. They're also very well ventilated. Air circulation is great. They're probably a safe place to be at this point. Now, we mentioned miners, and not enough has been spoken about. Bitcoin halving is coming up. Whether coronavirus is still an issue or not, it is coming up in a couple of months. Do you see it having any effect? The way the markets are right now, the uncertainty, will that affect the halving at all?
Well, certainly this is a macro event that none of us expected. So we're seeing that reflected in the price of Bitcoin, where we saw the large drop, we saw it recover. But this is something that was definitely unexpected. I don't think anyone in their 2020 roadmap believes that there was going to be a pandemic outbreak. With the halvening, it's going to happen. So the halvening is going to occur sometime, I believe, in early May. Bitcoin.Clark Moody is a great website to go to where you can look at his dashboard, and that dashboard has different metrics where you can look at block time, halvening estimated date, etc. So I believe it's early May. Right now, I think we'll have all of the concerns over coronavirus probably priced into the market by the end of April. It would make sense by that point in time. We'll know how effective different medical treatments are. Are there any early ones? What's the propagation rate like, et cetera? So I think in about a month, we'll understand how bad it's going to be. So I think in about a month, we'll probably see lows in the mainstream financial markets. And then that's in April. And so then the market starts to rebound in May. I believe the halvening is a good narrative that very much, there's a lot of debate as to whether the reduction in supply with the increase, with the reduction in supply, does that, sort of create a more, an environment where there's a greater chance for demand increasing to be kind of a little bit more sensitive to demand increases. So I think, the reduction in supply alongside probably the kind of overall bearish fears in the market starting to evaporate and turn bullish again about the economy turning back on, I think feeds really nicely into the halvening news cycle. So you really couldn't ask for a better setup for Bitcoin and a halvening. So you've got a halvening, you've got the worst macro event in basically the last 100 years, other than World War II. You get the halvening, plus that you've got the Fed talking about unlimited quantitative easing. Literally every single central bank and government across the world is printing as much money as possible. You couldn't ask for a better setup for Bitcoin in late 2020, early 2021.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest arguments that Bitcoin has going forward is it's a limited supply. It's set at that 21 million number. Now, it's interesting because when, Corona Mania first hit, people were losing their shit, going out and stocking up on as much toilet paper as possible. Why? They feared that there would not be enough toilet paper. They feared that they would not be able to get their hands on toilet paper. Why is that same fear that drives people to immediately run out and buy by the caseload toilet paper? Why do they not get that same fear? Why do they not act the same in their behavior when it comes to Bitcoin? When we know that Bitcoin will run out, we know that Bitcoin has a set supply.
That's a great question. And so we see this happen in the bull bust, the bull bear cycles. So, for example, 2013, 2017, years before that, Bitcoin was at a much lower price. And then all of a sudden, as the price increases, more people become aware of it. As more people become aware of it, they buy into the expectation of that value increasing, a FOMO cycle, if you will. And so with toilet paper, it's the same thing. Toilet paper, if you had taken every single human on the onset of the coronavirus and put them in a room and didn't allow them to communicate with anyone else, I think you would find very few people would start stockpiling toilet paper. However, when they see that other people want to stockpile toilet paper, then they go, why shouldn't I as well? It's a reflexive process of people seeing an increase in demand and buying ahead of that expected increase in demand. Bitcoin's price works in a very similar function. As people expect Bitcoin's price to increase in the future, they buy ahead of it, aka FOMO. And so that fuels another bull run, whereas the price keeps increasing, people keep buying into it, and that makes the price go higher and higher, which increases awareness and draws in new people. And so with Bitcoin, we've got an early primer on that, being, myself being around for the 2013 and 2017 cycles. And it's funny because toilet paper literally represents the exact same thing. It's all perceived limited supply. And so the rest of the world really hasn't internalized Bitcoin's limited nature. One of my favorite sayings is that, when people ask, is the halvening priced in? Halvening is priced in for us who believe, and it's not priced in for the rest of the world, which is 99.9% of the population. So in that regard, Bitcoin's supply schedule is known, but it is only cared about by us. And when the rest of the world starts to care about the supply schedule, that is a lot of demand chasing very, very few Bitcoins.
Mm-hmm. And it's similar in the contrast of the believers and the non-believers the non-believers, the institutional money that was in crypto that, kind of sold off their crypto along with all their other assets at, at the beginning of this kind of fear campaign from the coronavirus. Does that enable, a unique opportunity for those believers to actually, kind of buy crypto at this lower price because the non-believers kind of got out in fear?
Yeah, so Bitcoin with its very intense volatility, Bitcoin wasn't endorsed by a university, Bitcoin wasn't endorsed by a government or the banking institutions. So to believe in Bitcoin, you really had to believe in the core fundamentals of how the protocol works, what it stood for, why it was created, and so those are called the hodlers or the believers. And to hold on to Bitcoin as an asset, you really, really have to believe in it due to the fluctuations in price. A lot of people got lucky and maybe they bought from 1,000 to 20,000 and sold at the top, but that's an extremely small amount of people. To really believe in Bitcoin, you have to hodl through many different waves of going up 20x in price and then dropping 80%. And so I've done that 3 times. And the hodlers that will exist at the end of this cycle are the ones who are the most convicted, the ones who can hodl the hardest. So a lot of the institutions may have gotten out in this last big dip. And if they have, those coins have been transferred to people who more believe in Bitcoin. It's a very fair process of redistributing coins to those who believe in it most.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hope the hodlers stay hodling even through the toughest of times. Stay strong, everyone. Dan, thank you so much for joining us over here, and I hope you stay strong and stay safe over there as well. And for all our viewers at home, if you want more on blockchain, crypto, and technology news, make sure to check us out at blocktv.com.
Watch us on Amazon Fire TV and Roku.